Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Sí, yo sí escucho bien.
Hello, you can hear me now? Okay, so good morning, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the third day and our last day of this global conference on sustainable plant production, which we've held for the last 2 days, and today is our last day. So my name is Elizabeth Nsimadara. I'm the president of the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation, the Director of Women Affairs at the Pan-Africa Farmers Organization level, and also the Africa representative on the board of the World Farmers Organization. So today it's indeed a special honor for me as a representative of the farmers to chair this very important session as we wrap up all the thematic sessions that we've held for the last 2 days of this conference. And our last day having a focus on a thematic area that is very dear to my heart and also very dear to the hearts of my fellow farmers and the enabling environment. In this thematic session, we are looking at how farmers can thrive and lead the transition towards more sustainable food systems, the food systems that are just, that are fair, that are balanced, and that are rewarding to us as farmers, because you are very well aware that agriculture for us is a livelihood. It's our economy. And it's us farmers who, by our daily decisions, will drive the transformation that you're looking for on our farms, and the decisions that we make on a daily basis while interacting with our environment, whether it is in terms of access to inputs, production inputs, whether it is on access to the services, on access to markets, and the policies and regulations regarding subsidies, regarding every aspect of the agricultural value chain. So in this session, we will discuss in totality the farmers' needs in regard to the enabling environment that is necessary to support farmers, but also on how farmers can organize to influence policies and participate in service provision and markets. Together with me on the podium is Anne-Sophie. Anne-Sophie is an agricultural officer at the Plant Production and Protection Division at the FAO. On my left is Marcelo Quintero. She's a leader at Agroecology Initiative from the CGIAR. This initiative is looking at transforming food, land, and water systems across the Global South. She's also a director, multifunctional landscapes for the Alliance of Biodiversity and SEAT. And at my extreme left is Ana Maria Rodriguez. She's a research director of climate action at Alliance of Biodiversity International and International Center for Tropical Agriculture, or CGR. And next to Anne is Tania Martinez Cruz. She's an interdisciplinary researcher. She's a water management specialist and social sciences researcher, and an Ayujich, I don't know whether I've mentioned it properly, indigenous woman from Mexico. She's an associate researcher at the Free University of Brussels and a consultant for the Stockholm International Water Institute. Join me in welcoming this team at the podium. So I'm very delighted to have been a co-chair to prepare this session, and I want to acknowledge the precious contributions of my co-chairs, Channing Adit, the Director of Environment, Production Technology at IFPRI, and Rashid Sulaiman, the Director of the Center for Research on Innovation and Science Policy from India, who are connected with us virtually. And I also take this honor to welcome all the participants who have joined us virtually for this great session. Without further ado, I would like us to go straight into the session. As plenary speakers, we have speakers who are connected virtually. Mr. Hector M. Robres Belang is the Director General of the Organization of Productivity at the Secretariat of Agriculture and Rural Development, Government of Mexico. We have Owen Badel. He's the Chief Executive Officer, Precision Development. Mr. G.V. Ramanjayel, he's Executive Director, Center for Sustainable Agriculture. And lastly, Christine Davis, the Senior Research Fellow, Development Strategy and Governance Division, International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI. So without further ado, as a first speaker, we welcome Owen Badel, the Chief Executive Officer of Precision Development, and you have the floor for the next 10 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Badel.
About one aspect of the enabling environment, about information services. And I'm thinking very much of information services as different from a purely technology or ICT agenda, and thinking about how we can design services for smallholder farmers. And I want to begin with just a statement of the problem. Here's a representation I'm sure you've all seen before of estimates of the yield gap, the gap between what smallholder farmers could be producing and what they are producing. And roughly speaking, depending on the crop, depending on the place, on average, smallholder farmers could either double or treble their yields. So we have a serious problem here. It's a serious problem that leads to low incomes, in some cases to hunger and malnutrition. And of course, increasing agricultural yields and incomes is a key pathway to more investment, including in human capital and people, in education. The yield gap leads to higher prices, it leads to unsustainable agricultural behaviors, and of course it leads to increasing inequality. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. But I just want to remind ourselves of that starting point, and I'm sure you all know this better than me. This in some ways is the key slide, and there are lots of words on the page here. Why is there a yield gap? And we have to remember that in many cases, it isn't because farmers don't know what to do. In many cases, it's because faced with the prices they face for inputs and the prices for outputs, that it's simply it's not a good investment for them to spend more money on inputs to increase their yields if the market value of what they produce doesn't cover the costs of the inputs. And that's a big part of the yield gap. But there are other parts too. Knowledge doesn't diffuse easily and quickly always to smallholder farmers. In many cases, smallholder farmers lack real-time information that their counterparts in other countries would have, information about weather, or about pests, or about prices, about the availability of inputs and where they can get them cheaply. In many cases, smallholder farmers face risks that mean that it's not sensible for them to invest in more expensive inputs, if that would mean putting them and their family at risk in the event, for example, of a bad harvest in which they lose all that investment. In many cases, it's simultaneity in markets, that input markets don't provide enough inputs because farmers aren't buying them, and farmers aren't buying them because the input market has too few inputs at too high a price, and the same for outputs. And then a big part of the problem has been excessive generalization, that you get sort of nationwide or region-wide advice to switch your crop or switch your practice, which isn't specific enough to a particular farmer, to a particular farmer's land type, to their geography, to their availability of inputs, to prices they face, to the weather conditions they face. And so you get something that might on average increase people's incomes, but for many farmers will not be optimal for them. We haven't in the past succeeded in customizing advice to farmers. So that leads to some obvious roles for information systems: to diffuse knowledge, to customize advice to particular farmers, to invest in and provide more real-time information, to help them mitigate their risks, and to improve market linkages. And all these are things that can be done with information systems. And I'll come in a second to why you might want to do that, but in particular, you want to do that because it's incredibly cheap at scale. It's much cheaper than using, for example, in-person extension services. The additional cost per farmer that you serve with these kinds of systems is extremely low. Here, these just happen to be literally come on my desk yesterday of some particular programs that we're currently designing and building, providing specific advice to maize farmers in Ethiopia. And there are a small number of extremely high value practices that could increase their yields, and which our work with the farmers suggests they don't have enough information about to implement. And they in many cases are aware in general terms of these, but don't have enough specific, customized, targeted information for them. And the yield increases available from these, from a small number of practices, are large, significant. They probably don't accumulate, so you shouldn't just sort of add these up and think, well, that's a doubling of inputs, doubling of incomes, but it might be very significant increases for smallholder farmers. Similarly with Indian cotton farmers. The increases you can get by just sowing at the right time, using forecasts of soil moisture, can enormously increase yields and profits. Sowing at the right time doesn't add to any input costs, so that's pure additional profit if you do that. Beyond just giving advice about particular practices at the right time, we're looking at offering loans for farmers to buy water tanks in Kenya to enable them to provide water to cattle. Increases milk production. It's extremely cost effective and scalable. And we are currently paying for high resolution weather forecasts and providing advice to farmers in Pakistan. And we're getting very, very high levels of user satisfaction from the farmers that we serve. The early days for us on this. But in particular, farmers telling us that because they had advice about the floods before the recent flooding, they were able to get their harvest in before the floods, and that saved their income for the year. So how would you serve these information needs? And I've put what would Google do? But what would Google do, not if they were trying to sell us things, but if they cared about increasing the livelihoods of the world's poorest people? Can we apply the approaches of the tech industry, but to the problems of smallholder farmers? What we do is we provide free information through mobile phones. Most smallholder farmers have mobile phones. Most smallholder farmers do not have smartphones or data plans. So we're looking mainly at voice and text messaging, although increasingly some farmers do have access to things like WhatsApp and Telegram, and in some cases to the internet as well. But we're mainly focused on the kinds of phones that most smallholder farmers now have. And we provide customized, targeted content. We profile the farmers so we know a lot about them. And then we customize information to meet their specific needs of the kinds that I've been talking about. We try to think like a tech company rather than like a government or an NGO or an international organization or an academic. So we are very focused on understanding what the user need is, using human-centered design to figure out what kind of service would be meaningful and usable by them, which would engage them, customizing targeted messages in the way that the tech industry does, and then using experiments to iterate and figure out how to make it a really engaging product, and then scaling in partnership with governments, NGOs, and the private sector, but providing a service that's free to the end user, to the smallholder farmer. And unlike tech companies, we also share everything we're learning publicly as a public good. Our aim is not to increase our size, but to make the world a better place. And if everyone else adopted this approach, we think that would happen. The impact is significant yield gains for each adopter. Not enough adopters yet. We've got more work to do on that. Big increases in adoption, enormously valuable benefit cost ratio because the cost per additional farmer is so low. So at scale, we're down to around $1, $1.25 per farmer, and those costs come down as the number of farmers goes up because the cost of reaching additional farmers is very, very low. We're currently serving 7 million farmers in 10 different countries around the world. But there is pretty significant variation in our estimate of impacts across different populations. So there's a lot further to go. So with 30 seconds to go, here's the summary. Information services can really contribute to transforming the enabling environment for smallholder farmers. In some cases, high-value knowledge. In many cases, real-time information that's currently not available. Customizing that advice to the farmer, linking farmers to markets and helping them manage their risks. It's massively cost-effective, highly scalable, at least 10 times more cost-effective than just providing cash transfers if you adopt tech best practices. Thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Badel. That was, the presentation was straight on point. Thank you for highlighting the importance of agricultural incomes as a clear pathway for agriculture transformation, because if we are to support our farmers, we also need to think about increasing their incomes, and also highlighting the risks that farmers experience in terms of the generalization that we already see. You've pointed out that farmers need specific and targeted interventions, but also pointing out what Google should do in terms of improving the livelihoods of farmers globally, and the role of data in identifying services, and pointing out, of course, the examples of the work that you're doing, providing advisory services, and beyond just the advice, linking farmers to most of the different services, but also highlighting the role of information, which is very critical in terms of transforming the sector. That was a very excellent intervention, and thank you very much for joining us. So the next presenter is none other than myself. So I'm also going to be sharing with you the experience of farmers' organization, and especially from our perspective as Eastern Africa Farmers Federation, in terms of access and adoption of production inputs and technology. So as you can see on the screen, I'm going to be looking at promoting farmers' access and adoption of sustainable inputs and technologies, and giving a case or an experience of the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation, where I chair the board. I'm the president. So next. So to start with, the Federation is an umbrella of national member-based organizations in the 10 Eastern African countries, as you can see them highlighted in green on the map. Our membership are national level cooperative associations, farmers associations, youth in agriculture and women in agriculture organizations, those that have membership right from the grassroots. Currently, we have 24 national level farmers organizations representing over 25 million smallholder farmers. And the vision of the Federation is a prosperous and cohesive farming community in Eastern Africa. Our activities are anchored on our new strategic plan, which is running from 2021 to 2028, and is focusing on transforming smallholder agriculture into a rewarding investment opportunity. Next. So in order to achieve this, we are envisioning achieving this transformation of the smallholder into rewarding investment opportunities through the 5 mutually reinforcing thematic areas. And number 1 is taking the concept of aggregation to scale. You all know the agriculture sector in the region, in Eastern Africa region, but also in Africa as a whole, which is subsistence in nature. And without aggregating farmers, you can't achieve the needed quantities and the needed qualities that are required on the market. So the second strategic plan was looking at strengthening farmers as key actors across the entire value chain by prioritizing entrepreneurship. A lot of gains were achieved, and so we want to put them to scale under this new strategic plan by making sure that that concept of aggregation is moved to another level. As you can see on the photo on my right, on top, where we are aggregating inputs for our farmers. The second thrust area is on leveraging on digital technology. In the region where I come from, more than 70% of our farming households at least have access to a mobile phone. So we want to see how we can leverage on this existence of mobile phones so that instead of just using them to call friends and families, they can use them for business. They can use them to access extension information. They can use them to aggregate their demand for inputs. They can use them to access markets. They can use them to access weather information and other services. The third thrust area is on economic services. As I mentioned, the second strategic plan was anchored around entrepreneurship. But we realized that this vision was more owned at regional level and at national level. So we want to see how we can cascade the understanding of economic service delivery to the subnationals and the individual farmers on their farms. The thrust area number 4 is on advocating for supporting policies. This is the core of our federation, lobby and advocacy plus representation. We've supported most of our farmers' organizations to come up and support policies at national level. We have more than 30 policies where we've made a contribution at regional and at national level. And the biggest achievement that we've had of a regional law is the farmers championed Eastern Africa Cooperative Societies Law that was passed by the East Africa Legislative Assembly as a private members bill. And the entire process was championed and facilitated by the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation, though the bill is still waiting assent by the different heads of states. And number 5 is on improving capacity of members to be able to discharge their representation mandate. And this is both at governance level, but also at management level. As you can see the trainings on the second photo, where we are conducting governance trainings to some of our leaders of the cooperatives. and meeting them on their farms or on their cooperatives that are closer to their farms. We want to take this capacity training away from the conference rooms and take it to the farms where farmers can learn from their fellow farmers. Next slide. We also have cross-cutting areas. Issues of gender, issues of youth are key to the Federation, and also resilience, which takes care of climate change and the recent shocks that you've seen, like the Russia-Ukrainian crisis. So my outline for the presentation will look at the definition of what do we mean by sustainable production. And then I will also take you through the background, the situation of our farmers, and what we are doing as a federation, and what we see also as the next steps. The photos on my right are actually photos from my farm, and I'm trying to showcase certified inputs or certified seed and the production that they can produce. Next slide. So by definition, according to OECD, the concept of a sustainable farming system refers to the capacity of agriculture over time to contribute to the welfare by providing sufficient food, and I want to mark the key words, sufficient food and other goods and services in ways that are economically efficient, that are profitable, that are socially responsible, while also looking at improving environment. So in terms of improving access and adoption of inputs and technologies, this has already been seen in the concept, in the definition of sustainable farming systems. The photo on the right side also shows a maize from one of our farmers, and the one below shows the aggregation at one of the cooperatives, how it is done. You see the weighing scale, one of the cooperative managers. The maize is being is brought at the central location, and it is weighed and taken to the aggregation center. Next slide. So in terms of the background and what we see as most factors for a farming site from the farmer's perspective, what is a better farming site? We're looking at a site that has a better climate, a favorable climate for farming. We're looking at soils. The soils must be favorable for agriculture. We're looking at the nutrients, the soil nutrients, but also the water resources. But when you look at the African agriculture and the regional agriculture, most of it is rain-fed. And over time, farmers in Africa and the region, the Eastern Africa region, have experienced reduction in productivity as a result of poor management of the factors that I've raised above. The climate change. We failed to manage climate change, and it's good that next week we are moving to Egypt for COP27, and these are some of the issues that we are going to be discussing. Issues of soil, issues of nutrients, and issues of resources, water resources. We have failed to manage these resources. There's poor implementation and unpredictable policies at national level. Every now and then, you find that the agriculture sector is somehow double taxed, or in other instances, it is triple taxed. And all this is a burden to the farmer. What does this bring? Low investments in agriculture value chains. And when you look at the low value chains in the agriculture sector, there are totally no investments in some of those low value chains. But also, when you look at the fragmentation of the value chain partnership ecosystems, everyone is working in their silos. The researchers are working alone, the extension organizations are working alone, the farmers' organizations are working alone, the development partners are injecting money in each and every partner, and there is no convergence. So this fragmentation leads to wastage of resources. You realize that one partner is funding almost the same services that each of these partnership ecosystem players are providing. On the right photo, you see aggregation of of the seed and fertilizers, and farmers are able to get them at a central location. Next. I know my time is up, but I would like to quickly take you through the situation at farmer level. The uptake of technologies is very low. We lack information. There is clear mismatch between the technologies and the high costs that are associated with this uptake. The other day, FAO was launching the SOFA report, and I think these issues were clearly highlighted. And then farmer-developed technologies and inputs lack abilities to scale. Most of the farmer-led technologies are not given the recognition that they deserve, and they are not supported. And then the concept of sustainable inputs and technologies is not well understood by the value chain actors. Each value chain actor has a different understanding when we talk about sustainable inputs and technologies. Next, I know I'm coming to the end of the presentation. What is being done? We believe in access to reliable and predictable markets. And of course, we're using different approaches to make sure that value chain actors understand and come up with tailor-made interventions for farmers. But also through our platform, we have aggregated the different value chain actors, and we convene them to make sure that they offer services. Next slide. The e-platform, like I mentioned, we have put it to scale. We started in Kenya. We are now in Uganda and Rwanda. And the business model approach that we use can as well be scaled to take care of different value chain. Next, what I see as the way forward, we need to inventorize existing technologies around inputs and the needs at farmer level. The approaches towards sustainable access and adoption need to have partnerships in place. We need to communicate this concept widely. All of us, we need to be actors, messengers, to make sure that this concept is communicated. We need to create market incentives and interest investments in this sector. And also we need to implement policies that support sustainable agriculture and access and adoption of such technologies. I thank you all for your attention. I'm very sorry, as a chair, I used additional time. So I've abused my position as a chair, but I would like now to straight away, since I'm not going to summarize my presentation, I would like now to straight away go to the next presenter of thematic session 7.4, Mr. Christine Davis. And I invite you to the floor.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. I hope you can all hear me. I'm just trying to swap my screen out at the moment. It's giving me a little bit of a problem.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Good day to all of you. I'm just going to stop the share for a moment and get my screen in the right position. Sorry about the delay. But I'll be following on Elizabeth's presentation to talk about agricultural extension and advisory services. Okay, are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, so I want to be talking about some gaps in agricultural extension and advisory services and the ways that we can overcome these gaps in providing services to smallholder farmers and other producers. I want to start with the key messages, and this is that extension has this important role in equipping farmers to deal with the risks and the challenges that we see today and that we just heard about from Elizabeth. And I'll be using the so-called best fit framework to talk about the different characteristics of extension that we see some gaps in governance, in financing, in capacities, and engagement with clientele. And we can really only overcome those gaps by fixing them at multiple levels. This slide here shows the impact chain, how extension on the left-hand side, the characteristics of extension that I just mentioned, the governance structures, management capacities and cultures, the methods, and how we engage with different communities affects the performance of extension, the timeliness, the quality, the effectiveness, and the relevance, and how this in turn brings about those positive, sustainable outcomes and impacts, things like changes in knowledge and attitudes, productivity, empowerment, and so forth. And note that this chain approach actually takes place in the policy environment. It's not separated from the agroecological conditions and the enabling or disabling policy environment and so forth. So we have to think about all of those things as we think about the performance of extension and how it contributes to outcomes and impacts at farm level. So the first gap that we see is gaps in governance. Sorry, let me just try to move my slide again. How extension is governed. So we see that decentralization, that is transferring decision-making to local levels, enhancing public participation, did actually improve access to extension for both women and men farmers. But in the case that we're looking at here in Ethiopia, we saw that men actually had more improvement in access to extension, meaning that the gender gap was actually increased through decentralization. And then in Ghana, Daniel Resnick found that the devolution of extension services, that is transferring planning, management, and co-financing to the local authorities, had both positive and negative effects. So it did enhance accountability of the local extension services, but it undermined their provision. We actually saw that the local government median expenditures fell by 36% in the 5 years following devolution. So we do see gaps in governance. Secondly, we have gaps in financing. Now, this chart here is actually just showing the data for global development finance, your bilateral, multilateral money flows, and not the domestic investments through national budgets, although I think we'd see a similar trend. So according to OECD data, more than $1 trillion was dispersed between 2015 to 2018 for development finance. Out of this, 44 billion or 4.3% went into the agriculture sector. And in the agriculture sector, we see about 1.8 billion or 0.2% going into ag, education, training, and extension, and so forth. So we do see some definite gaps in financing in terms of agricultural education, training, and extension. Globally, we see a huge gap in capacities, particularly individual extension capacities, and particularly in the public sector. This chart shows the training levels of extension staff by the different sectors: government, private sector, university, etc. And it shows that out of the 1 million, approximately million staff we have around the world today, extension agents, more than half of them only have a diploma, that is 2 to 3 years of post-high school, post-secondary education. And a related issue to this is that management of extension staff can be improved by providing incentives, professionalization, better salaries, rewards, educational opportunities, and so forth. But in our global study we did 2 years ago at IFPRI, we saw that there's very little incentives and that salaries themselves are very low, and that helps motivate staff or demotivates them if they're not high enough. And then we have gaps in methods. So everyone is talking about the promise, the potential of ICTs and digital approaches, but can these approaches really deliver? We have several studies on this. Researchers looked at the impacts of 3 complementary technologies in maize farmers in Uganda, using video, using integrated voice response or IVR, and short message services or SMS. And they found that video had a positive effect on knowledge, on adoption, and yield, but IVR and SMS had no significant impacts. Similarly, in Ethiopia, we saw video-mediated extension having a wider reach, a wider impact than conventional extension. Also, extension staff might not be ready for the digital tools. In a study we conducted in Rwanda, we looked at the digital readiness of staff from different sectors, and we found that staff who were younger, who came from the private sector, or they had access already to smart technologies, more education and training, were more digitally ready than the other types of staff. There's other ways, too, to increase extension reach through methods and to reduce costs and improve efficiency. This includes the use of community extensionists, also called lead farmers, village agents. And while these para-extensionists, as I call them, can be effective, according to Kipto and Frenzel, based on a study in Eastern Africa, in general, these para-extensionists lack capacity and they do require institutional support to do their job well. There's a number of methods that have shown to be effective, and they need to be institutionalized and scaled up. For instance, farmer field schools, they've been institutionalized in some places, like in the country of Rwanda, but they should be better integrated into formal systems, more appropriated by local communities, and more harmonized and scaled up at the regional level. We can say the same for other approaches like participatory farm radio or edutainment, the Shamba Shape Up program that we have in Eastern and Southern Africa. And then finally, there's gaps in community engagement, how extension reaches clientele, and particularly marginalized group, maybe women or indigenous communities, youth, socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And numerous studies, we show some here below, have shown that women in particular lack access to extension services. They also might lack specific other types of services like credit, the ability to hire labor. They don't have land in many cases. They might not be able to get financing. And we really need to find better ways to engage extension clientele through these gaps. And then finally, I want to talk about how can we overcome these gaps. As I mentioned at the beginning, we need to intervene at multiple levels: individual, organizational, and institutional. At the individual level, both public and private staff, extension staff, need upskilling. They need better skills for today's challenges and today's needs. We need more intensive training of lead farmers and mentoring of lead farmers by extension agents in order to improve their performance. Extension staff themselves need better incentives. Even if their salaries are low, incentives can help attract and retain staff. In Ethiopia, we found that incentives like housing, providing electricity and transport were actually more attractive to the women staff than the salaries themselves. This incentive issue is also an issue of organization and management. At the organizational level, we can have more professionalization of extension staff, registration and regulation of service providers, providing career paths to extension staff, continuing education, and rewards. All of these things can enhance extension performance. And then again, going back to the methods, digital extension does show promise, but we do have to be careful here that certain social groups are not left out. We maybe need to provide digital literacy skills to particular farmers, air shows at times that are convenient to women so they're not left out. Methods like farmer field schools have actually been shown to have promise in reaching people with low literacy and reaching women. And it's really important to provide information to all members of the household, not just to the household head, who tends to be a male farmer, but to all farmers. And then finally, in terms of reaching youth, entrepreneurship training has shown to be effective in attracting youth into agriculture and doing more for livelihoods there. And then finally, at the institutional level, we need a lot more investment. We need support in agriculture and particularly in extension. And research actually shows that when you invest in extension, it makes ag interventions more effective. Secondly, policies and strategies. We do have a lot of policies and strategies about extension, about digitally enabled extension, pluralistic extension, gender-sensitive extension. but these policies are not always implemented, right? And it's usually for a lack of funds or an implementation strategy. So these need to be implemented and not just put on the shelf. And then finally, I just want to say farmers must be at the center of all of this. At the individual level, farmers can be part of the search for solutions through participatory methods and through equipping extension staff with the right skills to use participatory methods and to engage farmers. At the organizational level, we can have farmer advisory committees contributing to extension programming and having a say in what the program should be and what extension should be doing at different levels. And then at the institutional level, we need to engage farmers in agri-food policy dialogues and in the governance structure themselves. I think that putting farmers first and matching this with the support, particularly financial support, is going to help overcome these extension gaps that I've been talking about. So with that, thanks very much, and I'll turn it back to the moderator.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christine. And the key point that I've picked from your presentation is that farmers must be at the center. And we need to engage them in all the dialogues. We need to use participatory methods. We need to address the gender gaps. Information flow should reach each and every member of the households, not only targeting the household heads. And the use of digital approaches, looking at different digital approaches like use of videos, messages, depending on the target constituencies. And this digital divide gap need to be addressed. But also, more importantly, we need to increase financing for extension, as the statistics showed that extension receives limited financing. So we need to increase financing for extension. So thank you very much for that intervention. And we hope there'll be questions coming to you at the end of the presentations. Just to inform members who are physically present here and those who are participating virtually, there's going to be a time for discussion at the end. And so we will request you to submit and upvote your questions via the Mentimeter. The link is going to be provided in the Zoom chat. And you can also access this link at the GPC website. And later on, you will have the opportunity to ask, for those who are participating physically, to present your questions to the different speakers, but also for colleagues who are with me on the high table. So I would like to invite the next speaker, who is going to take us through thematics 7.5, Hector M. Robrez Belang. You have the floor to make your presentation, and welcome.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, ¿no? Agradezco la invitación y lo que voy a presentar yo es precisamente lo que estamos haciendo en México, en la Secretaría de Agricultura y Desarrollo Rural, ¿no? El primer elemento que hay que distinguir es que la política pública en México se caracterizaba por la captura, ¿no?, de empresas y de corporaciones grandes de los recursos públicos. Esto generó un abandono del campo, que se incrementara la desigualdad, la presencia de la pobreza y que hubiera un intercambio desigual campo-ciudad, ¿no? Todas estas características llevaron a la sobreexplotación tanto del trabajo como de los recursos naturales, ¿no? El gobierno actual, ¿no?, se propuso cambiar políticas públicas y planteó como características principales es poner en el centro de la política pública a la población campesina e indígena, hacer que la política fuera fundamentalmente de transición agroecológica, ¿no? No es producir por producir, sino producir sobre la base de prácticas sustentables, ¿no? Además de baja resiliencia y de baja emisión de carbono, para generar alimentos sanos, ¿sí?, cadenas cortas, que es importante, ¿no?, acercarlos y transformar los sistemas alimentarios, ¿no? Y generando derechos para los productores, ¿no? De preferencia a los pequeños y grandes, ¿no? Hay una serie de programas, ¿no? Nuevos, que son las características, el programa Sembrando Vida, que atiende a 450,000 productores, y el programa Producción para el Bienestar, que atiende a 2 millones de productores, ¿no? En suma, 2,5 millones de productores atendidos bajo esta lógica de transición agroecológica. Además, hubo una acción de etiquetado frontal, ¿no? De advertencia en los alimentos ultraprocesados y las bebidas con azúcares añadidas, ¿no? El decreto presidencial del 30 de diciembre de 2020 que prohíbe el uso de siembra comercial de maíz transgénico y la eliminación progresiva al 2024 del glifosato, ¿no? Una campaña presidencial de la vida saludable, se volvió una materia obligatoria en las primarias, secundarias, generar, como lo han señalado aquí, un crédito agrícola con incentivos para prácticas agroecológicas, que no lo había, sino estaban asociados a estos paquetes tecnológicos que nosotros denominamos Revolución Verde, ¿no? Se aprobó la Ley Federal de Fomento y Protección a los Maíces Nativos y está en discusión una iniciativa de Ley General para los Alimentos Saludables, y el gobierno, dado la crisis, estableció un nuevo programa que es el programa antiinflacionario, ¿no? Y contra la carestía, el PASIC, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que los ejes rectores que nos mueven? El primer elemento es que hablamos fundamentalmente de pequeños y medianos productores, hasta 5 hectáreas. Y la importancia es porque es la estructura agraria de nuestro país. Además, generan el 54% del valor, generan el 85% del empleo pagado, y los principales commodities, ¿sí? El café, el azúcar, el aguacate, lo producen estos, los comercializan otros, pero quien genera la materia prima son ellos, y de ahí su importancia. El segundo elemento es que había que recuperar las capacidades productivas de los productores, y para eso propusimos la producción de bioinsumos para sustituir el fertilizante químico, la selección participativa de semillas, recuperar estas capacidades de los productores, generar la asociación. El productor sabe, conoce, tiene experiencia, y entonces generar con ellos conjuntamente un relevo intergeneracional, pero también el diálogo de saberes con los técnicos. Eso nosotros no hablamos de extensionismo, sino hablamos de acompañamiento técnico. La cooperación interinstitucional y innovaciones tecnológicas. Este es lo que caracteriza la propuesta que estamos haciendo, ¿no? La otro elemento también central, que es el tercero, es recuperar las capacidades productivas del suelo. Para nosotros el suelo es un ente vivo, y por ser un ente vivo, debe tratar como solamente con fertilizantes, incluso debemos de ir quitando cada vez más los fertilizantes, ¿no? Y hacemos el uso de bioinsumos y microorganismos, ¿no? Alimentar a la planta, primero la selección de semilla en vivo, ¿no? Y después alimentar a la planta hasta sus últimas etapas con bioinsumos. Y considerar todas las cuestiones climáticas, de enfermedades, de plagas, ¿no? Que se pudieran presentar para que el productor tenga esa información y la genere, ¿no? El otro elemento es, como ya lo decía yo, nosotros no hablamos de extensionismo porque ese era el modelo anterior, dirigido a grandes productores, en donde el técnico supuesto se supone que sabe más, donde va dirigido de una manera direccional, es decir, el técnico le proporciona o le da información al productor, ¿no? Y empleo de paquetes tecnológicos, cuando mi país es muy diverso, y entonces muchos de estos paquetes no corresponden a las realidades y a las características físico-químicas de los suelos que existen. Por eso había que dirigirlo a la pequeña agricultura, ¿no? Reconocer que el productor sabe, conoce, y por lo tanto el conocimiento debe ser bidireccional. El productor aprende, el técnico aprende, los funcionarios aprenden también, ¿no? Y generamos las escuelas de campo, es sacar de las universidades, ¿no? De los centros de investigación, la investigación aplicada, y llevarla directamente a las parcelas de los productores, donde se convierten en escuelas de campo, donde hay un diálogo de saberes y el conocimiento se transmite de campesino a campesino, y ahí se hacen las prácticas, ¿no? ¿Cuáles son los resultados que hemos tenido en estos años que empezamos? Empezamos con esta metodología en el 2019, el 2022, En principio ya lo estamos desarrollando en 35 regiones del país, en 27 de los 32 estados, en 500 municipios, y tenemos este equipo técnico, ¿no? 35 coordinadores, 1,168 técnicos agroecológicos y ya 3,300 escuelas de campo, ¿sí? Otra característica importante es que nuestros productores están incrementando las prácticas agroecológicas. Prácticamente se están yendo de 3 a 12 prácticas, de un mínimo de 25 prácticas, ¿no? Están reduciendo el uso del glifosato, que eso es importante para nosotros, ¿no? Y están incrementando también el uso de los bioinsumos, ¿no? De manera significativa. ¿Qué significó este cambio de la política pública? Incremento, por ejemplo, en el caso del maíz, del 25% de los rendimientos y una reducción del costo de producción de 50%, lo que nos habla y nos dice que sí es posible este tipo de agricultura, ¿no? Para eso estamos produciendo todos estos bioinsumos con microorganismos que cumplen las características de las normas oficiales en México, ¿no? Y que nos permiten llegar cada vez más a más productores, ¿no? Y que más se volvieron significativos ahora con la crisis de los fertilizantes, ¿no? También hacemos publicaciones, aquí pueden ver el sitio donde las pueden consultar de cómo hacer un bioinsumo, porque la idea es que no solamente esperen al técnico, esperen el gobierno, sino también ellos lo hagan, aprendan, y entonces tienen que ser materiales sencillos y prácticos, ¿no? Tenemos publicaciones también que las ponemos a disposición de los productores, de otros técnicos y unas plataformas que pueden ser consultadas y son de acceso público para que todo mundo pueda acceder a ellas, ¿no? Y de esa manera lograr los cambios. ¿Qué significa esto? Es centrarnos en la política pública en los pequeños y medianos productores, con el uso de bioinsumos, no al paquete tecnológico, con acompañamiento técnico, es decir, con la permanencia del técnico cercano a las comunidades, con reconocer las prácticas agroecológicas que ya hacían y de esa manera poder transformar los sistemas productivos, ¿no? Por eso, las recomendaciones que nosotros queremos plantear aquí y que nos interesa, ¿no? Ya lo veníamos haciendo desde México y hemos hecho varios llamados a la ONU y a diversas agencias internacionales para tomar un liderazgo audaz, ¿no? Y alejarse de la pasividad, ¿no? Por eso pedimos un grupo de trabajo de composición abierta, ¿no? En el Comité de Seguridad Alimentaria para abordar la emergencia actual y los múltiples crisis, ¿no? El grupo debería de trabajar en todas las cadenas de valor de los sistemas alimentarios para construir una regulación internacional como fue para el tabaco, ¿sí? Sabemos que no va a ser fácil, que hay que luchar, generar, ¿no? Condiciones, ¿no? Para la regulación, y por eso proponemos la regulación de agroquímicos de alta peligrosidad, incluido el glifosato, entre otros, que incluso en México se va a discutir próximamente en nuestro Senado de la República para tomar estas disposiciones, el fomentar el etiquetado frontal de advertencia de los alimentos, la implementación de un código internacional de comercialización de sucedáneos de la leche materna e incentivos para la transición agroecológica sin organismos genéticamente modificados ni agroquímicos, ¿no? Que es lo que estamos planteando y es lo que estamos generando en México, ¿no? Lo que queremos decir es que esta alternativa es posible, es reable y que sustituyendo los agroquímicos no se cae la producción, sino la podemos incrementar con las ventajas de mejorar el suelo y las condiciones ambientales. Muchas gracias.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Hector, for really sharing the experience of Mexico and your approach towards sustainable food systems and scaling up agroecology in the year 2019-2022 approach, giving special focus on small and medium farmers. From your presentation, you highlighted a number of approaches that have been put in place by the Mexico government, including the policies, the different presidential decrees, the presidential campaigns that have taken place, but also the technical guidance approach that you're using to strengthen farmers' organizations, but also special focus on soil health and organic production, which are very key, and most importantly, the publication and the information that is out there on your website, which can as well be used by everyone because it is open for the public, meaning that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. So I think all of us, there's one or two things that we've picked from your experience, and you would be having a number of visitors on your website to check on some of these publications. And thank you very much once again for sharing your experience. So next on our next presenter is going to present, I don't know whether he's with us, is going to present Thematic 7.2, and is Mr. G.V. Ramajayeru. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. My apologies in case. So you have the floor to present, to give us your presentation, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Can the project be present? Yeah. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'll be sharing about how the agroecological approaches can be scaled up, and then our learnings in terms of working at a landscape level. Next, please. I am from Center for Sustainable Agriculture, which is based out of Hyderabad in India, and we work across the states. In several states, we work with farmers, so nearly with about 25,000 farmers who are shifted to organic and natural farming, and around 75,000 farmers who are in transition we work with. And while we are working with these, we also organize farmers into cooperatives, farmer producer organizations, so that end-to-end support services can be provided. And it's also, in the process, we also realized it's not sufficient to work with individual beneficiaries here and there, but work at a scale, landscape to cover the whole farmers area, so that we can learn from what it needs to build the entire ecosystem. So we chose to work in a few areas at a village level. So what I'll be sharing is about the work on the ecosystem level, which we are trying to work on. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So when we talk about agroecology, it's not just one practice, it's a set of practices which can be adopted locally. We look at it as water harvesting, water moisture management at the soil level, adapt to cropping patterns, regenerative soil systems where we can move from chemicals to non-chemicals, and organic seed systems where seed can be adapted locally to the growing conditions, both in terms of soil fertility, management practices, and weather conditions. And also we look at how we can assess the value for cultivation, value for use, so that farmers can make right choice about their seeds. Similarly, on the pest management, weed management without using agrochemicals, and integrating livestock into agriculture. So these are the 6 core approaches which we take. But these 6 approaches can work only if the landscape level practices also work. For example, the natural resources in the village, the common property resources in the village also need to be managed well, because farm level management can only give a small benefit, but an ecosystem level management gives much larger benefit to actually recreate the agroecosystems towards sustainability. And in addition to working with farmers at the village level, we also try to create support systems, so institutions and backward linkages, so credit institutions, extension services, a whole lot of support services which are required for farming to make it happen, and forward linkages in terms of markets, value addition, etc. are also created. So that's an ecosystem we are trying to look at. It's not just the natural resources ecosystem, but the whole institutional and support systems ecosystem we are trying to focus on. Next. Yeah. So our journey began with working on community managed sustainable agriculture, we call, where the farmers are trained on agroecological approaches, and farmer field school approaches used to train the farmers. So practicing farmers as resource persons are trained as resource persons, and farmer field school approach is taken up to train more and more resource persons, and they regularly train other farmers. So the multiplication effect actually comes from using the community resource persons. It's not only about extension services provided through community resource persons, but the entire project management is done by the community. Initially, it was through the women self-help groups, and now we are doing through the farmer producer organization. So it's a community management as well. So the entire program management is also done by the community. And this program is adopted by Government of India later on through the Mahila Krishi Sasaktikaran Pariyojana, and is now part of various rural livelihood missions across the country. And also the AP Natural Farming Project in Andhra Pradesh also adopted the similar model in terms of scaling up natural farming. Next, please. So when we talk about villages, why we need to look at villages? Because when we are trying to look at working with small and marginal farmers and very dispersed farmers, the results are very poor. The results are very poor, and sustaining it on a long-term basis is also very difficult. And particularly when the over-exploitation of natural resources is happening and associated impacts of climate change is threatening the sustainability and biodiversity, we need to bring in a comprehensive approach. It's about production, non-production, the whole village level approach is what we need to bring in. So what we are trying to do is to look at conservation and enhancement of bioresources at the village level, and creation of on-farm, off-farm livelihoods for income generation. So household income security is also one of the key issue, and enhance the nutrition security at every household level, and integrating ecological, the ecology, equity, bioeconomy at the village level. So that's what we try to look at when we talk about bio villages. Next, please. So here we took up, I shared two examples we are trying out. In Andhra Pradesh, there is a large program going on as Andhra Pradesh Natural Farming Program, community managed natural farming program. You might have heard about the experiences in that. So in this, we are working with 16 villages, apart from many other villages where we are working with individual farmers. 16 villages with 2,615 farmers covering about 2,748 hectares is the whole coverage is village level, where we focus on villages, complete transition at the village level. So village level plannings are done. The Gram Sabhas is the village level body of farmers, and women self-help groups, farmer producer organizations at the village level. These bodies are involved in decision making, planning and decision making and implementation of the program. So the resolutions are passed by the Gram Panchayat. Gram Panchayat is the local self-help government in India. So village Panchayat is the village self-help government. It's an elected body, and that's the last rung of government reach to the villages. And we also involve the local officials, government officials to participate. And by the definition, what we call as village, which is into bio village, is 85% of the farmers and 85% of the area converted into organic and natural resources. And we have a water budgeting, water harvesting plans at the village level. So including the soil management practices at the village level. And we develop sustainability indicators in terms of ecology, economy, and social. Similarly, we are also working in Chhattisgarh. Very recently, 1 minute, please. In Chhattisgarh, we declared 110 villages, 10,264 farmers, 65,000 hectares as organic. And these villages, the work has just began to integrate other issues as well. So organic practices we started with, and then we are going to now work with other areas of livelihoods in these villages. Next, please. Next. So we try to institutionalize the extension services into the FPOs, farmer producer organizations. So community resource persons organize training programs twice a year. And then there is a farmer field schools happen for the new farmers to join. And then there's a practicing farmers data is managed through participatory guarantee system. And the farmer producer organizations are also federated, where they can procure and then link the products to the markets. Next. And we also do livelihood analysis, feasibility analysis based on which livelihoods are planned. It's not that livelihood, just a menu of options are given to the farmers, but we do an analysis in terms of what is the vulnerability at the household level, what are the opportunities available at the village level, and what are the opportunities available at the family level in terms of livelihood assets. And then based on that, plans are made, and then farm livelihoods, allied livelihoods, and then non-farm livelihoods are integrated into the family so that at least the income can double in the next 3 years. Next, please. One of the key challenges we faced with is reaching out to the first 15%, 12 to 15% of the farmers is much easier, who are innovators and early adapters. Next, please. So, but later on, when we are reaching out to 30%, 40%, and 50%. So as we move on the scale in the village level, we find it difficult. Next, please. Please, yeah. So the chasm, which we see, the gap which we see from crossing over from that initial 10 to 15% who join as the model farmers, from there to rest of the farmers at the village level, is the key challenge. So what we try to do is, next please. So what we try to do is to bring in other areas so that we can standardize the practices to work, and then provide complete set of support services, including extension services, inputs, financial linkages, market linkages, etc. And also build in a sustainability of these services into the organization itself. So institutionalizing, that helps in terms of reaching out from that 12 to 15% to 85%. So village level reach is possible only if we can integrate all these things. Next, please. So to do this, we organize farmer field schools, participatory guarantee system. We also now started measuring the carbon sequestration at the field level, at the farm level, and then payments based on that. We are also trying to involve schools and others to increase the common property resources, so the growing the trees, growing the plants, etc. So the seed ball campaigns we organize regularly, and biodiversity conservation and revival of traditional varieties which are available there, soil and water conservation measures, all these we are adopting. Next, please. So the results from the 16 villages shows that 70 to 80% of the farmers, we could 70%, nearly 70 to 71%, we could reach out in the first 2 years of time, and nearly 67% of the cropped area is transitioned towards organic. So across the situations, we could see that this conversion is possible by going through a very well designed and planned approach. Next, please.
Can you kindly wrap up?
And yeah, 2 minutes, please. So this is the design of the farm of FPOs. Next, please. I'll just use one more. So we also used the farmer business school approach of FPO to modify in a modified farm. We call it as Kisan Business School, to train farmers through a participatory design, problem solving approach, and learning by doing. Next, please. And we also provide support services to the FPOs so that the all players who provide support services can be brought together. Next, please. This is the last slide, last but one slide. When we try to work with farmers and then make an assessment of the carbon credits, we could find that 0.1% on average over 4 years, about 8,000 acres. We could see that there is a carbon, soil organic carbon increase, and then the farmers also will get benefit by getting this carbon credit. So if we look at extension services, participatory guarantee system to link to the markets, FPO management, and also through soil organic. So if we can have a better systems which are all integrated at and then get various players together, I think at a landscape level we can find solutions. We can not only find solutions but also sustain it post project, because many times what we find is we can do great examples of projects, but when the project is over, it is not getting sustained. So farmer field schools, they can be integrated into power producer organizations, and the farmers can manage the whole initiative. It can get sustained. Thank you very much. I'll stop here. Yeah, so this is the number details. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ramajayeru, for that elaborate presentation, more especially on the on the different landscape approaches for the sustainable agriculture in India, sharing examples of your community management program, cases of Andhra Pradesh, and the villages, the different villages, the target farmers, but also more importantly, the way you're bringing together the different ecosystem actors, including the local governments, and also the support you're giving to farmer organizations and producer organizations to provide capacity in terms of in-house capacity to be able to offer extension services, the farmer business school approaches that you've just shared, and for pointing out this important issue of carbon markets and how you're supporting farmers to quantify soil organic carbon to build up for carbon credits. That was excellent, and thank you very much for the presentation. And now we have a number of questions coming through the Mentimeter. But before I move to the questions, I would like to give the floor to my colleagues on the podium to give their own perspective. I know, Tanya, I would like you to bring up the perspective of the indigenous peoples and farmers, and you being the custodians of the land. So I would like you to, based on what you've heard from the different speakers, what is your comment, bringing in the perspective of the indigenous communities? And then Anna, of course, a number of speakers have talked about climate change and, of course, its effect in terms of agriculture. And just next week, we are going for COP27. So what is your message that you can bring to this kind of discussion? And Marcela, agroecology, you've heard it is very key, and most of the institutions, including the representative of Mexico and almost every speaker, has talked about agroecology. So I would like also to bring out some of the salient issues under agroecology that you would like to put forward to the audience. So let me start with Tanya. You have about a minute.
I will try to be brief. I think what I can take from the presenters first is, like, generally when we speak about farmers or indigenous peoples, we forget that we are right holders. And the Mexican government mentioned that. Another perspective that I find interesting is that when we talk about, we've been talking about farmers and how we can approach women, but also I think we're leaving behind someone really important, which is youth. And we have to recognize that many of our farmers are quite old, and we need to think who is going to be the next generation providing us food. And I mention youth also because some people pointed out on the need of local knowledge to embrace it. And the knowledge itself cannot be kept if people do not keep it. And we need younger generations, indigenous peoples, farmers, women. So I would say we're in a conference on plant production, but we also need to put the social, the people at the center, and we need to do that more in an active way.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tanya. That was on point, and I'm not going to repeat that. You stressed it very openly. And so now let me move to Anna.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you all the presenters. It was really interesting to hear all these different things that are happening and how we are advancing. So in relation to climate, my call would be to really put resilience in the center of these conversations. And if we are serious about building this resilience, we need to empower vulnerable populations, and they could be women, indigenous peoples, youth, but they need to be empowered to become agents of change, to really be being able to respond to these climate challenges. And I would be very much emphasize the importance of understanding incentives. People in general respond to incentives. We need to understand what are the incentives behind those vulnerable populations to really build this resilience, to act upon these risks. And perhaps the last thing that I would like to emphasize is the importance of the participatory approaches, either in building these technologies. So since the very beginning, usually from the research side, we tend to get really involved into developing the knowledge, and then trying to figure out how somebody else is going to use that solution or that technology. That doesn't work, and we have learned that that doesn't work. We need to involve the users, the farmers, the vulnerable groups since the beginning of thinking how to develop these solutions, because otherwise they are not going to be fit for purpose. And in relation to climate information, there was a lot of discussion on how to bring information to vulnerable populations. What we have learned from exciting activities in Latin America, Africa, and Asia is that if you want farmers to use climate information to make decisions that can improve their livelihoods, they need to be part of the production of that information. Climate information cannot be something that is coming out from the sky and that you are just trying to put that in the in the hands of farmers and expecting that they are going to use that. Farmers have a lot of knowledge to inform climate models, because they are the ones that are observing from generation until generation what is happening to their crops because the rain is not coming, because there are higher temperatures. So they have really rich knowledge that can improve those climate models. Once that they become part of the production of that information, the dynamics totally change, and they are ready to use that information in a meaningful way. It's not just through radio, through WhatsApp, providing the climate information. It's making sure that farmers have the ability to use that information to inform their decisions so that we can see an impact from that information. So let me stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna. Now next is Marcela.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I was really excited and waiting for this session about enabling environment, because if you may recall in my presentation first day on agroecology, I called the attention of the need to look beyond the farming practices if we really need to advance into a transition that is more sustainable, that is more towards sustainability in agriculture. So, and I wanted to say this, and from the presentations today, I want to recap on 3 main elements that I think are key to create those enabling environments to transition towards sustainable agriculture and agroecology. One is information, but information that is customized, and I like the first presenter when he says we need to avoid excessive generalization of information. The second one is organizational innovations, and I think you mentioned that, Elizabeth, in your presentation on what are those changes in terms of how farmers are aggregated, how they are organized to be well represented in the decision making, and also how we find mechanisms to coordinate better among the different value chain and food system actors. And I think this is important because we also heard that if we do improvement on the farming practices, we also need simultaneously investment on markets, policies, etc. So this coordination among different actors, I think, is important, and was also very highlighted by Elizabeth in the case of Africa. And the third component is extension, but calling extension not only as providing passively information to farmers, and farmers being just recepting that information, but information that is really relevant to them, and also customized for the preferences and based on what they know already about farming. So I think those 3 elements are key and are very key for in agroecological transitions. Now I would like to finish just with 2 questions that I don't know, and probably it's a call if we can include something like that in the recommendations that will be drafted after this conference, and is who's the role of making sure that we have proper extension and accompaniment for the farmers in the countries. I see a lot that this is a gap that is now fulfilled by NGOs or development agency, but who's really that role? And should not be calling for a greater investment on this? And we saw the numbers from the IFPRI presentation on the need for a more solid commitment on investing on this. And the second one is who's the role of coordinating the different value chain actors. So again, should be development agencies, NGOs, or should also there be greater efforts from the governments to try to improve the coordination among value chain actors? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcela. for that intervention. We have a number of questions from the audience, but we are left with about 5 minutes. So I'll request Owen to spend 1 minute and Christine 1 minute in responding to the questions. And then I will have a few minutes to wrap up the discussion. So to Owen, what do you think of agro-dealers and other private sector actors providing extension information to their farmer customers? And what are the mechanisms to ensure data ownership and security to protect farmers and their families? You have 1 minute.
The issue for input suppliers providing extension information is that they are trying to increase their sales, and that may not be in the farmer's interest, and the farmer knows that. And so you may have a trust deficit. It may be that farmers are being advised to overuse inputs or use the wrong inputs according to what the input dealer is selling. Maybe over time that market would settle down. Farmers would know which agro dealers to trust, and it wouldn't be in the agro dealer's interests to provide misinformation. But it seems to me that you need impartial services that provide up-to-date information to farmers. And I think one thing that we can do is help link farmers to agro dealers. So one issue at the moment is that farmers don't know which agro dealer to go to get the best products at the best prices. And information services can enable farmers to find a suitable agro dealer partner near them. And that can help bring down prices, increase the farmer's bargaining power. And lower prices for the right inputs can increase yields and net incomes quite a lot. So I wouldn't rely on the private sector to provide impartial information to farmers, and I wouldn't expect farmers to trust that information or act on it. So I think you need public services or impartial services alongside those activities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Owen. Next question is to Christine. Can you expand on why women farmers in particular lack access to extension? What are evidence-based methods to improve access for women, youth, and vulnerable populations? You have 1 minute.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We have been discussing that in the chat, but yeah, women are often not reached with extension services because they're very busy in the farming and also in the household, taking care of children and cooking and things like that. They have very limited time. They also have lower literacy levels than men. And there's cultural reasons why a male extension staff, most extension staff tend to be male, although that's changing in some places. Culturally, they can't reach out and talk specifically one-on-one to a woman. So those kinds of things restrain it. So evidence-based approaches to reaching more women include the use of participatory approaches. I see there was a question also on the expansion of, how can we expand on the participatory approaches? So we need to be culturally sensitive to different gender-based needs of farmers, as well as other, socioeconomic differences of farmers and how to reach out to different types of farmers. As I said during the presentation, providing information to all household members and not just the so-called household head, who is oftentimes a male farmer, helps to get more information to the women farmers who are doing a lot on the farms. So I'm happy to provide more information on that as needed.
Thank you very much, Christine. And this brings us to the end of the presentations. I know there are more questions in the chat, but we are glad to respond to you bilaterally. You can reach out to us. Our CVs have been posted in the chat, but also on the different social media handles, and we will be glad to respond to the questions. Just to wrap up the sessions, kind request to the interpreters, if you can give us just 2 minutes so that I can wrap up this session. So many points came out of the discussion, and I would like to highlight the importance of partnerships, mutually reinforcing partnerships. So that was very key in these discussions. The importance of farmers and indigenous people being at the center, and not, and of course, understanding that it is their right. They have a right to land. and they are key players in the agriculture value chain. Then also the need for increased financing to the agriculture sector in general, right from production up to the end of the entire value chain, strengthening farmers' organizations to have a solid voice and play a representation role, the importance of information asymmetry, avoiding generation of information and making sure that the right audience receives the right information. Issues of soil health and agroecology were very key in the presentation, and also the need to embrace digitization, innovation, technology, and mechanization. And also the issue of the next generation by focusing on youth, focusing on women, because we believe they are not only the future, but they are the present and the future of the agriculture sector. And then climate change. The need to bring farmers at the center of all the climate discussions, the climate approaches, but also empowering them as agents of change to be more resilient and understanding the incentives around climate change landscape in general. And lastly, issues of nutrition, food security and nutrition were also very key, and they came out strongly in this session. So I would like, on behalf of session 7, to really thank you very much to our audience, both those that are physically here and those that are connected virtually, for coming in to listen to the session, but also for sending in your questions. And like I mentioned, we will be glad to respond to the questions that you've raised on the chat. So I bring the discussions to close, but I would like to invite you to the coffee break and also invite you at 11 back to this room for the next session. Thank you very much.
Coffee is served at the atrium. Thank you.